Hey all, this is Brown at I Have Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the movie Halloween on DVD. Halloween came out in 1978, and it was the third theatrical film to be directed by John Carpenter. Up to this point, his prior two films were Dark Star, which was a rather hilarious sci-fi stoner comedy, and Assault on Precinct 13, which was a nifty action thriller. That particular movie was inspired by the films Rio Bravo and Night of the Living Dead, according to John Carpenter himself. And you watch that movie and you see that Carpenter and his people were able to work with a low budget to create a rather suspenseful atmosphere, and to a point where even though Assault on Precinct 13 was clearly an action thriller, there were times where it felt like a horror movie. So the fact that Carpenter's next movie was a straight up horror movie, and a good one at that, probably shouldn't be a surprise. But the surprise comes in the fact that Halloween went on to have a momentous impact on the horror genre and the film industry in general. For one thing, the movie was an independent one, and it was budgeted around $300,000, but it went on to gross somewhere close to $50 million. And I believe the exact figure was, I want to say it was 47 million, but don't quote me on that. But the fact is, this was, a big hit, and Hollywood definitely took notice. And the film managed to also launch the careers of people both in front of the camera and behind the camera. But it also introduced audiences to the terrifying serial killer Michael Myers, who would go on to become one of the most notorious boogeymen of the horror genre. And it also introduced the characters of Doctor Loomis, as played by Donald Pleasance, who it could be argued was something of a benevolent Captain Ahab-like figure. And you also had the character of Laurie Strode, the soon-to-be traumatized babysitter, who was played by Jamie Lee Curtis in her very first film role. But yeah, this is something where, a lot of things started with this movie, and it literally was a game changer in a lot of ways. But one of the other things that's memorable about this movie is that the horror, it's more in the realm of, say, what you don't see it is scarier than what you do see, or the power of suggestion has more of an impact than something that's actually carried out in front of you, like something that you can actually see. And so the kills in this movie, the brutality, is the brutality in this movie, is potent, but it's more done in the shadows. So what you do see is jarring enough, but what you don't see manages to be scarier than if you were to, say, see everything in all its gory details. And the sequels, from what I've seen of them, a couple of them managed to strike a good balance between, say, suggestion and straight up blood and guts, but a couple of them, by most accounts, just relied too much on in-your-face blood and gore, and the subtlety that was very much on hand in this movie was lost. So I guess it just depends on which sequels you see, but the fact is, Halloween manages to be one of the most successful slasher films ever made, and definitely one of the best horror films ever made, because you saw what could be done, on a low budget, and still manage to, make things to where, you're terrified afterwards, or at the very least you're reluctant to walk home at night after seeing this movie. But let's go ahead and get into the plot. So the movie kicks off in the year 1963, Halloween 1963, in the town of Haddonfield, Illinois. And the Myers family is, celebrating Halloween in their own way. The parents, they go off to a party on with a bunch of adult friends of theirs, and they leave their daughter Judith, who is the older sibling, to babysit the younger sibling, Michael Myers. And so once the parents are gone, Judith calls her boyfriend to come over, and the two of them commence to getting it on. But while this is going on, Michael Myers, a little 6-year-old kid, goes around the house, grabbing, first, a clown mask and then a butcher knife. And he goes, up to where his sister's bedroom is, and he waits for the boyfriend to leave. And once his sister's alone, he goes in there and stabs her to death. His own sister, this 6-year-old kid with a butcher knife, stabs his own sister to death. And so he comes back downstairs, and he goes outside where his parents have come back from their little soiree. And so naturally, they see their kid, in a clown costume, holding a bloody butcher knife, and they take his mask off, and he has just this glazed blank look on his face. And so soon after that, he's committed to a mental institution, and he's kept there for 15 years. And it turns out that within that time period, or within that time frame, he's been approached by a doctor by the name of Samuel Loomis, who first genuinely tried to reach him, tried to figure out, okay, what's going on here? Why has this child done this horrible thing? But the thing is, Michael Myers would never talk, and he just had this look in his eyes. And basically, Loomis became convinced, over the years, that this child, something was behind this child's eyes that was not human. And he became convinced that he could not leave, that he must be kept confined in this institution. Otherwise, something horrible would happen if he were to get out, because he spent a certain amount of years trying to reach Michael Myers and get through to him, but for the rest of the years doing everything in his power to keep the kid locked up, because in his own words, or to paraphrase him, what he saw behind that child's eyes was pure evil, and it was just something that he just felt in his soul. And so fast forward to 1978, and Michael Myers is up for a parole hearing or review, I believe, and they call it, or a psychiatric review. And Dr. Loomis is, along with a nurse, they're going to to up Michael Myers and to take him to this court, basically to see if to have it decided if Michael Myers is fit to leave the facility, or if he's fit to, say, make his way out of the mental institution, and start to work his way back into society, but, or, if he's been cured or something. But basically, they get to the mental institution, and the power's out, and all the patients are, wandering around, the place, outside, and, and Dr. Loomis, I mean, he knows that somehow Michael's involved, somehow Michael's responsible for this, and so he goes to see if he can find someone in authority, like a security guard or something like that. But while he's out of the car, Michael makes makes his way out of the shadows and jumps on the car and breaks, into one of the windows and pulls the nurse out of the car, the nurse who was in the car, and drives off. And so at that point, Dr. Loomis realizes that the evil is loose, or as he himself says, the evil is loose. And he knows that, Michael Myers is, heading home, to Haddonfield, the town of Haddonfield, where it all started. And so Michael Myers, he makes his way to Haddonfield, and he kills a person along the way to steal that guy's clothes. And he wanders around the town, with his own, goal being unknown at this point. But, he crosses the paths of, 3 teenage girls. They are Laurie Strode, and then you have her friends Annie and Linda. And, they all 3 of them, they're, good friends with one another, and, they, they're trying to figure out what they're going to be doing for Halloween and everything. And so, Laurie and Annie are both, tasked with babysitting, some of the neighborhood children. Some of the neighborhood children for, the night of Halloween. But Linda, though, she's planning on, getting it on with, her boyfriend. And so the 3 of them, they're very much looking forward to, Halloween, and, just basically being able to, do something, fun. But they ultimately end up, crossing the paths of Michael Myers. And, for his own reasons, he sets his eyes on them and basically, makes Halloween into, something that's all the more terrifying for, these 3 girls, as well as for the town of Haddonfield. And, in the meantime, Dr. Loomis, is able to, once he gets to the town, he enlists the help of the town sheriff, Sheriff Brackett, and, tries to, convince him that, not only is there a serial killer, or not only is there a, killer in your town, but this is a killer that is beyond, something that you're, prepared to handle, and is, one of the most, potent forms of evil that you've probably ever experienced if you come across him. And so Brackett, he's, willing to play along, but, at the same time, he's reluctant to, believe, Dr. Loomis's words about, Michael Myers being, pure evil. Like, he's thinking, okay, crazy maybe, but, pure evil? What's the real story here? But, Dr. Loomis, though, he's soon, given credence, in the sense that, Michael Myers, launches a campaign of terror, in the town of Haddonfield against these, 3 teenage girls, and, basically, leaves, a few bodies in his wake. But, so as far as, the story goes, it's a pretty, simple one with some very eerie touches. And I gotta say that, one of the things I like about this movie is that we don't know what Michael Myers' we don't know what the motivation of Michael Myers is, okay? We know he killed his sister, at a very young age. We know that, he was basically catatonic for several years, without saying anything. And we know that, he was able to, make his way, from a mental institution, into the town of Haddonfield, and he was somehow able to drive there even though he had never driven before. So we know that there's something unnatural there because of that. But also, we know that he's come to Haddonfield, for some reason. Like, we know that he's drawn to the town, where it all started, like, for him. But we don't know why he's going after these three, teenage girls in particular. And neither does Dr. Loomis. All he knows is that Michael Myers is going to be in Haddonfield. If he's going to break out, that's the one place he would go. I mean, Dr. Loomis was able to, I guess, develop enough of a connection with Michael Myers to sort of read him to some degree. But other than that, though, we don't know why Michael Myers is doing what he's doing. And we're initially led to believe that, he's just an ordinary flesh and blood, killer. But then we start to wonder, if there's something supernatural at work, because of, some of his mannerisms. And also from what we hear of Dr. Loomis, and when he's talking to Sheriff Brackett about, his time working with Michael Myers. And so it's a very ambiguous type of evil we have on hand here. And when he's stalking the girls, I mean, a lot of the horror occurs, in darkness at night, but some of it also occurs during the day. And that's when we actually see Michael Myers stalking the girls at times. And at one point, Laurie is the one who manages to see him a couple of times. But then when they go to check out where she saw him, there's nothing there, or no one there. And so this is something that definitely puts Laurie on edge, throughout the day and going into the night. And, she's soon, put in a very terrifying situation. I mean, she's, a babysitter, tasked with the safety and responsibility of, two, little kids. And so what do you do when, say, some masked maniac, some masked, silent maniac is, going after you and has most likely, killed, some of your friends and loved ones, and, you can't get through to the police because, the phone lines have been cut. I mean, what do you do? I mean, it's a, very terrifying situation. And, Jamie Lee Curtis, I mean, she just did a very good job in the part of Laurie Strode. And considering this was her first role, I mean, she really played the part rather well, because she really came across as, a teenager, who, I mean, she has her own, plans, for Halloween, like, stuff that she had originally wanted to do, but she's like, okay, I gotta babysit, I gotta be a responsible adult here. But she's wanted to have some fun with them, maybe watch a movie with the kids, but then, her plans get, turned upside down when she's, pursued by Michael Myers. And I liked seeing how, she goes from, this, happy-go-lucky, teenager, with her friends and everything, and then she goes from that to someone who's gradually put ever more on edge, from her, brief, interactions with Michael Myers, like when she sees him, watching her, but then when he's not there, when she goes to check it out, I mean, it really starts to mess with her. And then sure enough, when he actually is going after her and there's no denying it, I mean, she manages to walk a fine line between being straight up terrified and then going into full-on mama bear mode. And so she's put in a situation where, I mean, you're thinking like, okay, well, if she's, screaming for help, why isn't anyone else in the neighborhood trying to help her? And one of the most terrifying parts of the movie is, towards the climax, she actually is, running around town at night around the neighborhood, screaming for help. And a few people actually do, turn their lights on and open their windows, but they see her and they take one look at her and then just close the window. They close the blinds and turn the lights out. And, it's something that, hits home in I guess you could say a real world horror type of way, because I mean, there have been a lot of instances in real life where, say, someone's screaming for help or something, but people just don't want to get involved, and regardless of what the situation is. And so Jamie Lee Curtis was very good in the part, and she would go on to play the character in a couple more sequels. The very next one, but then several years later, she would play the part again in a few others. But this is where the character of Laurie Strode got her start, and you see someone who is not, say, an invincible heroine. She's actually a very much flesh and blood heroine, in the sense that she's like, she doesn't have any combat training or anything like that, so she's not like a certified badass, but she does have enough intelligence to try and lure Michael Myers away from the kids, or to say try and get him into a position where she could try and stab him or hurt him or something like that. So but at the same time, she's very much vulnerable to his tactics as well, because she's cut and bleeding towards the movie's end. And so we have as a character who's very much believable as far as flesh and blood protagonists go, as well as terrified protagonists go, but she does have that sort of fight or flight instinct in her, to where she is able to put up a fight when her back's to the wall. It's just, well, she's up against something that may or may not be more than human. But and then you have the character of Doctor Loomis, as played by Donald Pleasance. And Donald Pleasance is, or I should say was, an actor who had been in quite a few classic movies prior to this one. One of his most famous parts was in the movie The Great Escape, which I would highly recommend checking that out. Great World War II set movie. And he was also in stuff like Fantastic Voyage, the James Bond movie You Only Live Twice. But with this particular movie, in the part of Dr. Loomis, Donald Pleasance basically gave life to a character who would, much like the boogeyman he's hunting, Dr. Loomis would go on to become iconic in his own way, as far as, say, monster hunters go. Because here's a character who literally spent 15 years trying to get through to Michael Myers, but say about half that time he genuinely was trying to get through to him, but then the other half of that time he was doing everything in his power to keep Michael Myers locked up, because somehow he was able to build a connection with Michael Myers, even though Michael Myers never said anything. He was able to form enough of a connection to realize that this isn't an ordinary basket case here. Like, this is something, well, for lack of a better term, supernaturally evil. And even though he could never prove it, he knew it in the depths of his soul. And the best he could do was try and keep the courts from letting Michael Myers out. because only he knew what Michael Myers was truly capable of. Even though he didn't know what Michael Myers' plans were, I mean, he knew that if he were to get out of the mental institution, then basically, his reign of terror would, end with a lot of dead people, for the town of Haddonfield. But so it's like he doesn't fully understand Michael Myers, but he knows enough to realize that he's got a genuine monster on his hands. And so and I liked how Donald Pleasance played the character, to where you got the impression that he was someone who at one point in time may have had something of a social life, but ever since Michael Myers came into his life, I mean, basically his whole life has been about nothing but Michael Myers. At first trying to understand and trying to help him, and then just trying to keep him locked up. And that's where the Captain Ahab sort of persona comes into play, or this mentality comes into play, because you see him here, and he really does come across as that kind of person, like someone who is dead set on killing the white whale, so to speak, except in this case the white whale is Michael Myers, so but there were moments where you kind of saw a glimpse of the person Dr. Loomis was before Michael Myers came into his life, because there are some moments where he has a good chuckle or two, and especially in the scenes with Sheriff Brackett, who was in turn played by Charles Cyphers. And whenever he's interacting with Sheriff Brackett, Dr. Loomis, I mean, like, he does still have sort of an air of doom and gloom about him, in the sense that he's trying to warn the people of Haddonfield that, and the authorities, that evil has come to their town. I mean, but whenever he's talking with Sheriff Brackett, he does kind of let his guard down a little bit, and you see a much warmer side to him, and you really do catch a glimpse of the person he may have been prior to Michael Myers coming into his life. But at the same time, though, the Ahab persona is the one that's the most dominant persona. And when we hear his story, to Brackett about spending, I think it was like 7 years trying to reach Michael Myers, and then another 8 trying to keep him locked up, because he knew that whatever was behind that boy's eyes was pure evil. I mean, it's a very memorable monologue, and probably one of the best monologues to come out of the horror genre. And that monologue in particular, as delivered by Donald Pleasance, definitely made the character of Dr. Loomis into someone who was genuinely iconic. And it also resulted in Donald Pleasance, gaining a rather large following in the horror community. And it also, kind of paved the way for, him and director John Carpenter to, develop a good friendship with one another, to the point where, Donald Pleasance would be in 2 other movies that John Carpenter had, which were Escape from New York and Prince of Darkness. Both cool movies, both worth checking out. But yeah, I mean, so Donald Pleasance, I mean, he already had a good amount of movies under his belt, before coming to work on Halloween, and he was in a few classic movies for sure. But Halloween was the thing that introduced him to a lot of people, to the point where it's like, he had some supporting roles in some, classic movies prior to Halloween, but Halloween is what, in some ways, put him on the map where everyone knew who he was. But But yeah, so Donald Pleasance as Doctor Loomis, knocked it out of the park. Him and Jamie Lee Curtis both, did very, well with their characters. And as far as like the other actors in this movie, for example, I mean, you have Nancy Loomis, who played Laurie's friend Annie. She's a familiar face who's been in a few other Carpenter movies. Like she was in Assault on Precinct 13 and The Fog, which came out a couple years after Halloween. Also a cool movie. But Nancy Loomis, I thought, did a good job of playing her character in the sense that she was kind of similar to Laurie, if a bit more I guess vocal in terms of, say, having a sort of snarky personality. But this may have been something that kind of backfired on her in the sense that put her in the side of Michael Myers. But yeah, like she and Laurie both they both take their responsibilities as babysitters seriously, but whereas Laurie, I mean, is someone who, I mean, yeah, she has a social life, but she doesn't have anything in the way of romantic relationships. Annie actually does have a boyfriend, and so she's wanting to get the babysitting stuff done ASAP so she can get together with her man. But this being Halloween and this being the night that Michael Myers comes into town, we see a character who ends up basically having their lives turned upside down in the worst way possible. And PJ Souls as Linda, I mean, I thought she did pretty good as someone who was more promiscuous, I guess you could say, in terms of her love life. And the funny thing is that with the type of character that she plays, nowadays, I mean, we're fairly certain that characters like her are going to be the first ones to get killed. And you see that on hand in this movie. And it could be argued that Halloween is one of the things that solidified that trope. That, I guess you could say, the hornier a character is in a horror movie, the more likely they were to be killed towards the beginning of the movie. But she played the part rather well, and so even though we kind of can tell, that things aren't going to go well for her, we are nonetheless on the edge of our seat when things go south with her. And similar thing with the character of Annie. I mean, both characters play the type of characters that we can sort of guess that, okay, so and so is going to die first, then so and so. But the point is, though, they did a good enough job in bringing these characters to life, and John Carpenter and his crew did such a good job of generating an atmosphere of horror that when things go badly for these particular characters, I mean, we still care, and we're still saying, get out of there, or something along those lines. We get invested in their characters, and especially with the character of Laurie, as played by Jamie Lee Curtis. And Charles Cyphers as Sheriff Brackett. I liked his character in a sense that he's someone who you get the impression really cares about his town, takes his responsibilities as sheriff seriously, but when he makes the acquaintance of Dr. Loomis, I mean, he starts to realize that, I mean, there are forms of evil that he has never come across prior to this particular Halloween, and in his time as sheriff of Haddonfield, I mean, he's never had anything like this. And he and Charles Cyphers and Donald Pleasance, I thought, had good chemistry with one another. And I liked seeing how, Sheriff Brackett, I mean, he was initially, reluctant to, take, you know, Dr. Loomis, as serious as, he needed to. But as the night wore on and he got to know Dr. Loomis, a little more, he started to kind of realize that, he had a genuine monster in his town. But Charles Cyphers is someone who has also been in a few other John Carpenter movies, much like Nancy Loomis and Donald Pleasance. I mean, he was in Assault on Precinct 13, Escape from New York, The Fog. So Carpenter tended to use some of the same actors in multiple movies, albeit in different parts. And so Charles Cyphers, if you've seen some of John Carpenter's movies, odds are you've seen Charles Cyphers in some of them. But last but not least, you have the actor Nick Castle, who is one of a few people who played Michael Myers in this particular movie, because there were a few times where, say, like during a few stunt scenes, or say certain scenes of unmasking, a different person played Michael Myers. But Nick Castle is the one who did the lion's share of the work in terms of, say, playing Michael Myers and basically imbuing him with this possibly supernatural vibe of darkness. And you never see, I mean, when Nick Castle's playing Michael Myers, I mean, all you see is his the clothes he's wearing, the ones that he killed someone to get, and he's got this white mask on his face, where you can't, like, there's these black eye holes, but you can't see his eyes, and there's no change of facial expression whatsoever, and all you get is this body language of a monster who has some unknown mission and will do whatever it takes to complete it. And whenever we see him moving around, I mean, at some points, I mean, both Nick Castle and you could say, like, the camera crew and everything, they do a good job of making it look like Michael Myers is at some points fading in and out of the scene, but in other points, though, when he's clearly visible, I mean, there's just something about the way Nick Castle like played him, like the physicality of it, that even if you see in a couple of scenes where you catch a brief glimpse of him in the daylight, I mean, it's still spooky, because the way Nick Castle plays him is, I mean, sometimes he'll just be standing there, but it's like he's watching you, and it's a very effective performance. I mean, considering that you never see Nick Castle's face or Michael Myers' face, I mean, with a few brief moments within the movie, but for the most part, within the present day setting, or then present day setting of the movie, I mean, you just have this boogeyman, and Nick Castle, I mean, he did a lot with something that may not have taken much in terms of, say, acting, but physically speaking, he brought Michael Myers to life. And two scenes I can think of that come to mind immediately are one particular scene where Michael Myers kills someone and has said victim impaled with a butcher knife into somewhere in the kitchen, right? And the guy's basically, this one character is on the wall and literally being held up by this butcher knife, and Michael Myers just sort of looks at the guy kind of like this, you know, like he's genuinely, you know, curious about, you know, this butterfly that he's just pinned to the wall. And it's a very eerie, you know, moment, and it's a very good, you know, performance, you know, from Nick Castle in terms of physicality. And of course you have, you know, the, you know, famous scene where he's going after, you know, one of the girls, and he puts this blanket on, or you see, you know, him standing there just, you know, covered in a blanket, and with this one victim's glasses, you know, over, you know, where his face would be, and he looks like a ghost wearing glasses, and he's just standing there in the doorway, you know, where this one soon-to-be victim is, and, you know, there's, you know, calling out to him, and she's, you know, basically saying, you know, hey, stop playing around so and so, because she's thinking that this is, you know, someone else, but no, she soon finds out that, you know, this is, you know, someone else entirely. But it's a very scary scene, though, you know, simply with, you know, Nick Castle literally just standing there in a doorway with this, you know, white sheet over, you know, his body, like, you know, a living ghost. And so yeah, I mean, and the story was by itself was pretty spooky, but in order to, you know, have a good boogeyman, you have to have a good actor playing the boogeyman. And Nick Castle, I think, did a really good job in terms of, say, having the lion's share of the work. And then, of course, you have the, you know, awesome score by John Carpenter, you know, which, you know, utilized synthesizers, you know, rather well, you know, especially for the time. And it's become, you know, a famous score, you know, that is, you know, known to a lot of people, you know, who are fans of the horror genre. And with this particular movie, you know, John Carpenter, you know, showed that, you know, he could basically create a musical soundscape for the realm of horror. And some of it started with Assault on Precinct 13, because he did the score, you know, for that movie as well, you know, and it's intense, but it's not terrifying. Whereas in Halloween, the music score is terrifying. And also, when it comes to, say, like, you know, camera work and everything, and, you know, editing, I mean, I think that, you know, John Carpenter and his crew did a really good job of, you know, building up the tension. And so even in scenes where Michael Myers doesn't actually kill someone, like when he's stalking them, I mean, whether it's in the daytime or the nighttime, you know, it's very scary, you know, because, I mean, yeah, I mean, you just have this character who's like a living nightmare, you know, someone who doesn't say anything. And, you know, here he is in this, you know, suburban town, you know, something that, you know, comes across as, you know, just an ordinary town with, you know, families and everything. And yeah, I mean, it's just a, you know, scary situation all around, and it's a scary story too. So I think that in terms of flaws in the movie, the only flaw I could think of really, okay, there are two things I can think of. You know, one, you have the sort of improvised plan that Dr. Loomis has, you know, for catching Michael, because, you know, he knows that Michael Myers is going to Haddonfield, and he does tell the sheriff what's going on. But when the sheriff is, you know, saying, well, hey, yo, let me, you know, call my men in on this. I mean, let me, you know, tell my men to keep an eye out for the guy, and you know, my men and myself, you know, we'll tell the town that, hey, here's what's going on. You know, keep an eye out, and keep an eye on your kids too. And that would make sense, in my opinion, at least. The more fresh eyes they're keeping an eye out, the more likely it is that Michael Myers, could be stopped before his reign of terror even begins. But Dr. Loomis, though, he tells them, don't do that. Just keep it between myself and you and your department. Don't tell the public, don't tell the people in this neighborhood what's going on. Because you do that, then they'll start seeing Michael Myers on, every street corner. And, and basically they'll be distracting the authorities, with, all their calls and, saying, hey, I saw Michael Myers here. And then someone else calls and say, I saw Michael Myers there. And, basically, Dr. Loomis persuades, Sheriff Brackett to, just keep it on the down low, but at the same time, he and his department, work together with Dr. Loomis just to keep an eye on things. But I think that this particular approach, while to some degree I can understand the logic that Dr. Loomis has in this particular situation, because in some respects, I mean, stuff like that can happen. You read about stuff like this happening where, people start, claiming that they saw, some criminal in the neighborhood, when, say, the authorities are asking for, the public's help and what have you. But then because they, keep on seeing this particular, criminal or something like that, I mean, and calling in the authorities, the authorities end up getting distracted to where, they can't really go after the real killer, that kind of thing. And so, I get what Dr. Loomis was saying, but at the same time, in this particular situation, this is a small town, and, I feel like in this particular instance, it would have been to the benefit of everyone if Sheriff Brackett had communicated with his department, and they in turn had communicated with the neighborhood, say, hey, here's what's really going on, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, while it definitely made things more intense in the sense that there's this sense of isolation, that makes its way into the movie as it nears its climax, which is very, in the sense of isolation that one gets is very terrifying. But at the same time, it just didn't really feel like an approach that made sense to me, at least in the sense of, trying to think of the good of the community, because if, Dr. Loomis had persuaded Sheriff Brackett to say, okay, go ahead and tell your men to tell the neighborhood what's going on, there's a chance that the body count that this movie had, would have been less than it actually was. So the other problem, I think, is that not so much the movie itself, because it's, an excellent movie, but the fact is this particular movie has influenced so many others. And so odds are, you've seen either a movie that rips off Halloween or a movie that was influenced by Halloween. And because you see these movies that came afterwards, you kind of pick up a pattern of things that you can predict maybe. And so by the time you see the source material, like where it all started, you're in for a treat, but at the same time, it's easy to predict, certain cases where certain characters are going to be killed because of this, that, or the other. It's because it's like, the rules that went on to influence all these other movies, they all came from here, or a lot of them came from this particular movie. And so, it's easy to make the connections and everything. So, but if you can bear in mind that Halloween was where a lot of it started, you might be able to, just kind of, accept that going in, and hopefully your enjoyment won't be marred by that. It probably won't be, but just, bear in mind, you might be able to guess, so-and-so is going to die, and then so-and-so is going to die, or, such and such is going to happen, that kind of thing. But I mean, other than those, quibbles, I mean, I think that this is a great movie. I think that as far as, game changer, horror films go, I mean, Halloween's definitely one of the best. And, it's also, one of the most impressive movies in terms of, say, working, the creative, team, working on a low budget to nonetheless make, a very immersive horror film. And I say immersive because, the town, while it's not a real town in real life, I mean, for the purposes of this movie, I mean, it is a real town. And it feels like, any form of suburbia you've probably been to. And so, when bad things start happening, it kind of hits close to home, and because of the relatable nature of the horror. Like a neighborhood is a place that's supposed to be safe, but if you can't be safe in your own neighborhood, I mean, what do you do after that? So yeah, I mean, in terms of, say, the horror in this movie, I mean, it's very well done, and in a lot of ways very relatable. So I'm going to go ahead and give Halloween, 5 out of 5 stars. I mean, this was a game changer, for the horror genre, and a great movie. So as far as special features go, you've got, widescreen and full screen presentation. You've got several theatrical trailers, original theatrical trailers, television spots, radio spots, talent bios, and still and poster gallery. And you also have a behind-the-scenes still gallery, but there's a little documentary on here, it's called Halloween Unmasked, which was made in 2000, and it was produced and directed by a guy named Mark Sorelli. I hope I'm saying the name right. And I have not seen the whole thing, but I watched a good portion of it, of this documentary, I mean. And, I mean, it was pretty informative, and, I mean, it was, halfway decent, thing to engage the audiences with. But yeah, other than all that, there's really not much in the way of quote-unquote special features. I mean, you got the documentary, but, that's about it. So, I mean, not quite a bare-bones DVD, but at the same time, considering this DVD came out in 2007, I mean, it would have been nice to have a couple more, bonus features, things like that. But, I mean, as far as the actual movie goes, I'm going to go ahead and give it, like I said, 5 out of 5 stars. This was a great movie. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And you got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to, like and subscribe. So y'all take care. Bye.